In this interview, I talked to Bob Stewart, head of technology at Brivity CRM and Place. This guy has been in the real estate industry for 20 years. He is a master at internet leads, and he goes on to say that he thinks we already have tons of deals in our current databases, and we really don't need to be going out and buying new leads. And he goes through all the numbers, and he can help show you how to pull all these deals out of your current databases. It is a very interesting interview, to say the least. You're definitely going to want to listen all the way through. So let's get right into the interview. All right, so I got my boy Bob Stewart here. Me and you've known each other for a while with Brivity. Bob, I mean, I know who you are. Everyone knows who you are, but I guess just kind of like tell everybody a little bit more about like what your role is at Brivity and Place and all that.
Absolutely, Chris. So I don't know. I think I'm going into year 21, or maybe I'm on the verge of year 22 in real estate, and most of my career has been spent kind of in the back end of a real estate business, right? In the database, or early on, we were one of the first groups to grab an MLS feed and put it on a website way back, in the early 2000s.
Exactly.
And so, right now, today, my job here at Place is I help our teams implement the tech that we have, and so I've spent a career inside of databases, and I think today, Chris, we're going to talk about like what we've seen, because so we've engaged now, Place, we've got, I don't know, 270, 280, I've lost track of partners out there. And when we partner with them, one of the first things that we like to do is go in and kind of analyze the database. And over the years, we've really we've figured out the formula for like how much business sits in an agent's database. And then we've studied for the last 4 years, really like the data around how do you get that business out of there, Chris? Because what we find is most teams that come into our world extract somewhere in the neighborhood of like 8 to 15% of the potential business that lives in their database. And so our obsession, really my obsession, has become what does Chris Colgan and his team need to do when they're in that database to get more than 8 or 10 or 12% of that potential business?
Right. Yeah. And when you're talking like database, you're saying Zillow, old Google Leads, sphere of influence, like everything, right? Like put together. Everything,
man. Anything, they're in your phone, they should probably be in that database. If you've had emails with them of any nature, they should probably be in that database. But definitely Zillow leads. And some of you guys have been buying website leads for 15 years. And there's a great follow on Instagram, Ricky Caruth. I'm sure you follow.
Yeah, I know Ricky. Yeah.
Instagram. Yeah, I like. He basically is like, your database is just people. It's just people that you might talk to who one day might buy or sell. So I'll give you the math really quick that we use so let's say you had a 10,000 person database, Chris, and let's say in that database, you're in Northern Virginia. So I don't know exactly what the home ownership rates are in like the primary counties you sell into.
It's probably like 75% or something.
I was gonna guess 70. Yeah. So let's do 70 just because that's easier math for me, maybe. But 70% of the people in your area where you sell are homeowners. So we can make this kind of assumption that would say, well, if I have a 10,000 person database and 70% of them are homeowners, I've got about 7,000 homeowners in a database of 10,000, right? So that's pretty easy math right there for us. So we're like, all right, I got 7,000 homeowners in here. NAR, in their last home buyer and seller, I think they call it the generational trends report now, but it's basically their home buyer and seller report they put out every year, Chris, said the average seller last year had lived in their home for 13 years when they went to sell it. So if we say, well, people move every 13 years, that means every year about 7.6% of individuals will move.
Okay.
And if that's the case, if I got 7,000 homeowners in my database and I say, well, 7% of them are going to move, you have 538 deals sitting in a database every year of 10,000 people, given that you have a home ownership rate in your area of 70%.
So I kind of just like threw up in my mouth a little bit because I have 18,000 people in mind from like the last 10 years. And so that's about 1,000 deals.
Yeah, eight or 900 deals.
8 or 9 deals.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're talking, what's funny is like as the market shifted, and clearly it's not like you can't walk out anymore. The mailman says to me, hey, I want to sell my house now. But like the calls I'm getting are like, I'm getting divorced or I'm getting a job change. So there's still people that have to move, right?
Yeah. Obviously. If you think about like, let's say that in a normal year, it's 5.5 million, but let's say it's 6 million transactions would happen in a great year. And this year there's going to be 4 million. So we could say, well, gosh, you know what? There's going to be a third less transactions this year. So maybe you'd take your 538 and multiply it by 66% or something and say, man, in this really hard market, if it's a 30% reduction in the number of homes that are going to sell in our market, you still have 355 potential deals in there. And by the way, we're both partners with Ben Kinney. Anytime he's in a room and I do this, Chris, from the back, he'll say something like, every one of those has two sides. Like he wants us to remember, exactly. You got 538 transactions, but there's 1,000 sides in here on those transactions that will take place this year.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, what's funny is yesterday I interviewed Katie Centinelli, who's like on Ben's original team, and you've brought her up many times to me. And I thought maybe she would say something like, some magical thing that she's doing, because she told me she's closed about like 40 some deals this year and she's got 6 pending, and she was so nonchalant about it. She was just like, I call everybody about 100. I make about 100 calls a day, and I talk to about 15, 20 people a day. But she told me on average, she talks to a deal that she closed, she had to reach out 10 times to get an appointment. So knowing that, is that kind of like aligning with what you've seen? Like, people, because it sounds like you really then at this point, we really don't need to be buying any more new leads if we have all these old leads we're not even talking to, I guess, right?
Yeah. Look, we have so in our world, we score databases, right? We've come up with this kind of methodology of how we score databases. You're familiar with it. We call it our Brivity scorecard, but there's really there's 5 variables that as long as you're hitting those, your business is probably in a position where you should go buy more leads. And I'll give you those variables. The number one variable, as we've studied the data, Chris, we call it database turnover rate. And it says, okay, you've got this 10, and I know yours is 18, but let's keep using the 10,000 example here, right? If we were going after these 538 deals that we know are present in a 10,000 person database, the database turnover rate says, how long would it take you, Chris, to call everybody in your database one time? Mm-hmm. Right? So now you use a CRM where you track you got your team in there, they're tracking their calls. Your database has a dialer built into it, right? Like you're in there making your phone calls in the database. Let's say that you guys made 1,000 calls this month into the database, right? Now that's what Katie does like in 10 days into her database. But let's say your whole team made 1,000 calls. Your database turnover rate is a 10. Right. It'll take you 10 months to make 1,000 calls a month to call those 10,000 people in there just one time.
Right.
Our target is a 4. Like we want our teams to be at a 4 or lower. 3 would be better, because think about a 4. If my database turnover rate is a 4, I have the capacity to call everybody in there 3 times this year. Right. Now, the reality of what will happen is some people will get 10 calls, some new leads, they'll get 10 calls because Katie knows she's got to call them 10 times before she can finally get them to agree to meet with her. So some will get 10 and others might get no calls this year. But we've got the capacity that everybody could get 3 calls if we had a database turnover rate of 4, where we were calling through it every 4 months. If we could get it down to a 3, then everybody would get 4 calls because we could call through it every 3 months and there's 12 months. So that's the first metric. The second metric, so in our databases, we've got, the ability to see when somebody comes to your guys' website, Chris, or when somebody engages that tool we use with our seller prospects, the market report tool, right? We're like, hey, here's what's selling around your house and here's what your neighbor's house sold for. And if they engage one of those things, like this month, Chris, they come in and they look on our website at properties, or they're digging into their market report to see what their neighbor's house worth. We want to make sure our teams, 90% of those people got a phone call from us, right? If they're active in the market, because you think about what is a new lead. I'm out there spending money. I got to get a new lead. It's so I can find somebody who I think is actively looking to buy or sell.
Right. Yeah.
If I've already got people on my website actively looking to buy or sell, and my team's not connecting with those, why would I go spend more money to get more of those people in that we're not even connecting with?
Right. 100%. That we're not even going to call anyways. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's database turnover rate at a 4. It's that my market report viewers and my website visitors, my actively engaged people are 90% of them are getting coverage. And then here's the wish in leads. Like when you set out, Chris, you dropped $1,000 this month to buy leads, you're hoping somebody was ready to go buy or sell today.
Right.
Right. And most of our agents, if they got that, right, we call them, they answer the first time. They're like, Chris, we want to go see a house this weekend. Like most people can figure out how to get that person to the closing table, essentially. But where agents struggle is with the person that when you call them today, a lead you just generated, they say, oh, we're just browsing, Chris, or we just like to look online, right?
Right.
And most agents go, oh, they're on a deal today, and they just get rid of. But in our world, that becomes essentially a nurture or a watch lead, right? Like somebody that I know is not, but I want to. If man, I bet if I followed up with them over a long period of time, they might actually do business with me. Like 80% of sellers will talk to one agent, Chris. NAR has this statistic in that home buyer and seller survey. 80% of sellers are going to go with like the one agent they talk to. But the problem is most people can't consistently follow up with that seller over 18 months. So the last two metrics are that 80% of my nurture leads. So in our world, a nurture lead means they're going to buy or sell potentially in the next 3 to 12 months. We want to talk to them once a month, or at least reach out to them once a month, right? And so 80% of the people we're calling a nurture need to have been reached out to once a month. And then 80% of the people we're calling a watch, which are people that are a year or more out, and we want to talk to once a quarter, we want to have 80% of those covered. And the reason for that is if we're going to go buy leads, and we know most of the ROI on our lead spend is going to come out of deals that we close 6 months, a year, or 2 years from now, we've got to be able to follow up and nurture and watch those leads over a long period of time. So that's some of the
100%. And like the thing is, if you're like, even like I have someone that's in my database calling like crazy. And the other day I did some role playing with her, and no fault of her own, it's probably my fault, right? She, someone said, hey, she said, everyone keeps telling me the rates. And then I role play with her. And then, I said, yeah, the rates are too high. And she was like, yeah, they are. I'll talk to you later. Bye. And I was like, whoa. Like, what, what, you're not following the script. And then, but like the thing was, then I was able to tweak it and say, all right, like, let's go back and like work on your scripting. Like you're making the calls, like you're connecting people, but something's not happening here, And so if you're not even doing that and your system can't track it, like that makes it even more impossible too,
Yeah. What is Ben's got his real estate success principles. We say the right thing. We say it to enough people. We say it enough times. Like most real estate teams have enough people to say it to. Like most of if you're a team listener, you probably got more leads than you know what to do with, right? So like that's never really the problem. And then, so it's say it enough times. And say it enough times is a function of is my team willing to get up and just take those swings, right? Because we know that phone calls, like of all the data we've found, you've got to call them. Like, that's what we know. And so, a lot of times you can even get people like your gal who's willing to get up there and take the swings. Then it becomes a matter of saying the right things, right? And so what you're talking about here is you got a database big enough, so you got enough people. You got somebody in there willing to say it enough times. But what is she saying, right?
Right.
What is she saying?
Yeah, 100%. So like if you were, and so you talk to thousands of agents all the time. So if you were an agent on a team and you're like, I got to, get 2 appointments a week and like really crush it this year and I want to make some money, knowing the market's tough, like, and you say you're on a team and they do have a database, old leads, which I can guarantee that they probably don't have someone calling those. Like, what would your day look like? Or what would you say this would be like, man, you're going to really be successful the next 90 days?
Yeah. So we kind of built this routine for so my day would look like this. I'd come in, and if I had any new leads that had come into my world somehow, maybe the team I'm on is paying for them, I'd jump on and make sure a call got to those new leads. Now, in a perfect world, if they came in last night, I would have been in a position to get notified on my phone and go call them right when they came in.
Right.
But maybe I was having dinner with my wife and kids, and so the next morning, man, I'm going to make sure those leads get a call. Then I'm going to go through and I'm going to follow up on people in the database where a month ago when I talked to them, they were like, you know what, we're busy, call us back next month. And I'd set reminders. That the leverage of a database, one of the biggest leverage pieces you have is reminding you who in there you should follow up with next. Right. So I'm going to go and knock out any reminders, Chris. Then I'm going to go looking for what Ben likes to call our hot and readies. Like if we had people engaged on my website or looking at my market reports, I'm going to go call those individuals because they right now are thinking about real estate, or they were an hour ago or 24 hours ago.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that anybody in my world that I think is hot, either has heard from me recently, or if it's been more than a week, I'm going to reach out to those people, right? Those tend to be my next appointments, the people that I'm like, hot, and I'm going to be thinking to myself, man, what could I say to this person today? What could I call and say to them to get them to meet with me?
Yeah.
Then I'm going to go in and I'm going to spend a little bit of time trying to put a little bit more fuel on the fire. So I'm going to look for people in my database that might need to be sent listings or need a market report, because if I give a few more listing alerts and market reports to people, tomorrow I might have an extra visitor or viewer to go call.
Right.
Then
go ahead.
Go ahead. No. And then I'm going to go through my past clients, my nurtures, and my watches, and people in my sphere potentially, right? And I'm just going to think to myself, who in here hasn't heard from me in the time frame that I want them to hear from me in? So like if they were a nurture lead, I'd go look for everybody that had been a nurture that hadn't heard from me in the last month. If it was watches, I'd be always on the hunt for a watch that's getting to a place where it's been more than 90 days since they heard from me.
Right.
I had a guy recently come up to me and go, hey, this was at our Built How event. He came up and he goes, I'm going to start doing what you guys have been talking about. And I'm like, why? And he said, well, I had this guy recently and I talked to him and he told me that they weren't going to buy for like 10 months, right? He's like, they were going to buy like next summer, that was like 10 months in the future. He's like, so I put him in there and I set a reminder for myself for like 8 months later or 6 months later or something. And he's like, then I go in there and I call the guy. And when I call him, he said he'd already bought a house.
Oh, yeah.
And look, that happens. But if he was really 10 months out, in our world, that means we'd want to check in with him once a month.
Yeah, right? I remember Ben told me one time, like he always does once a month, no matter what anybody says or something. Yeah.
Yeah, he would always cut it in half. Like if they said a year, he'd put it back to at least 6 months, if not sooner. But now, in the methodology we use says if we think it's next 3 to 12 months, we're just going to check in with them once a month. Because in that guy's scenario, something changed, right? He was like, we're not buying until next summer, except in March, the perfect house came on the market and they decided not to wait.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. It's funny because like the last 3 buyers I've closed, one guy, I followed up with him for 2 years. Another guy was a year. And then they both had like these 2 guys had job changes. And they both were like, told me, they're like, man, you were now, which I'm not always great at, but they were like, you were consistently hitting us up every couple months. And they're like, we really appreciated that. So we decided to go with you. And I was like, yeah, it does work. Now I couldn't imagine if I had done that my whole career, I'd probably be sitting on a yacht right now. I'm not talking to you on a Zoom call.
Here's the challenge about this, right? Like for an agent who's going, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to show up, be consistent. I'm going to follow up these leads for a long period of time. Is like if you ran your business like you should for a week, your life doesn't change, your business doesn't change, right? And if you do it for a month, even you'll start to feel it, but you still won't have a whole bunch of paychecks to prove that the activities you're putting in are going to change your life. But if you did it for a whole year, if you just said, you know what, I believe in this, I buy into it. Like you could literally change your life, your business. Like, and Katie Sentinel is a great example of that, right? A lady doing 50 deals a year up in Washington State, which is a lot of income she's making. But after a week or a month of being consistent, it takes a while of being consistent for this type of activity to pay off.
Yeah, you know what which blew my mind about Katie was she told me she didn't make a paycheck for 6 months. And then she told me her first year, she ended up doing like 25 deals for like $5 million. And I was telling my team this morning on our morning huddle, I said, this girl, woman is doing twice as hard as work as we are. And, to make us what we can make. And she's just consistently doing it. And that's like really what like kind of like blew my mind away about what she was up to.
It's funny. Like my mom is an agent and you know my mom's story, but she did 79 transactions her first year. And I really think like the people that have the hardest time leaning into the idea of a model or a system are the smartest of us. Because we're like, I don't need this. I got this. Right. And like in the 2020 market, those people did great. Right. Because it's like the business is everywhere. You're smart. You can keep track of a lot of it in your head. And I think my mom would have been a 30 to 40 deal a year agent with no database because she's just a really smart lady. She can remember everything. She can keep a million balls in the air. But she did 79 deals on the leverage of a database and on submitting to like the models and the systems, right? And that's Katie's, for whatever reason, and I don't know what the brain chemistry or the makeup or the disc profile is of these types of individuals, but they're just able to commit to the consistency of a process.
Yeah, she told me, I asked her a little bit about it, and she told me, and the funny thing was she was very shy when I interviewed her. I had to like kind of, not like in a grill or like literally, but I literally had to like tee her up a lot in the questions. And she told me that she just really wanted to help people. And that's like a canned answer, but I genuinely believe her. She was like, oh, I can just help them. And she had a really good experience when she bought a house, and that made her feel so good. So I think she just is just like, I just want to help people, but you can tell she's almost nervous when she makes those calls. but she just does it. You know what I mean? And I'm like, man, that's incredible. But yeah, I mean, the thing is too, like, even for me, I mean, I've been in here making calls, and it's like, it's been a wake up call for me. I've been in the business for 20 years. It's even people aren't coming up to me anymore and being like, I want to buy a house today. Like, I've got to go back to my old ways and be on the phone and everything, you know?
There's a Ben believes, I believe this. I think you would sign on to this idea. Our number one expense in our business is unconverted leads in our database.
Oh yeah, 100%.
This is like, based on the fact that, most teams are somewhere between extracting 8 and 15%. Like, we are leaving 80 to 90% of the business in any one of our databases on the table. Like, we have all these examples. There's a gal, Jennifer Carstensen. She's a Place partner, and she had talked about an agent recently on her team back in October that went in. He made 500 dials into their pond account. They have a pond, right? A lot of teams would have a pond. It's just all the leads that we can't get to, or nobody's working, right? He made 500 dials in there, Chris. Here's what happened. He had 52 good conversations. He had another 50 that were basically like not good, right? So he talked to 100 people, right? He pulled 9 real buyers or sellers out of there. He set 5 appointments with those 9 real buyers or sellers he pulled out.
That's crazy.
But here's the craziest part. He ran into 30 individuals that told him they'd already bought a house.
Yeah.
30, right? Of the 100 that answered, 30 of them said they'd already bought a house. Think about, out of the 400 that didn't answer, how many of those people had also already bought a house?
Yeah, dude, we had a guy on our team, and this is probably why I don't have like my Bradley Cooper hair anymore, like I'm bald. We had a guy on our team, and he was doing open house after open house, and he got flustered, but he was putting them all into Brivity. And he, like, one day after like 2 months of doing this, he was like, this job sucks. He literally said that. He's like, this job sucks. I'm going to stay on your team, but I'm getting another job. And I was like, dude, don't give up, man. I'm like, you're doing good. And he was like, nope. And he left. And then I don't know why, like a dummy, we didn't really call his leads. And the other day, I had my ISA, like, this was actually about 2 months ago. I said, start calling his leads and let's just see. He added like 40 open house leads. And by the time she got to 12 people had already bought, I was like, don't tell me anymore. I don't want to know. Yeah. And I thought to myself, I was telling Vanessa, who recruits for me, I was like, that guy walked away from probably 100-some thousand to go to a job that he's making, maybe he's happier. I don't know, but whatever. And I'm like, he had it. Like, he gave up right before the gold was there.
That's that. You seen that meme where it's like the 2 guys digging in the tunnel?
Yeah,
and the one
100%.
guy's packing his stuff up and walking the other way, and the other guy's just on the verge of the diamonds.
Right. Yeah. Where do you, I guess my final question for you, and like, do you think like, texting or email is going to take away from the calling at all? Or do you think it's still going to be heavily calling?
Look, you can set appointments via a text or an email. Like, don't get me wrong. Okay.
Right.
I think somebody skilled in writing could do that. But I've set out 2 different times over the last 4 years to try to prove that if you like send just 1,000 texts instead of 100, that there's some correlation to an increase in the appointments that you find in the database. And the data does not suggest that's true.
Yeah.
You can set appointments via text. Don't get me wrong. But the data doesn't suggest that if I just send 1,000 versus 100 texts, that I will find more appointments in my database. There's 4 years worth of data we have now that proves out that if I call my database more versus less, that I will find more appointments and ultimately more business. So look, I think there's a place for those kind of tools, the AI bots and the auto plans that automate some of that communication. But my personal belief, Chris, is those types of things are for leads. Once you have a person, once you're like, okay, it's a real human over here, I've talked to them, I wouldn't use AI bots or auto plan communication to try to communicate with a real human. Like, for me, that the way I work a real person is just to figure out what's the next thing I want to do with them. And I put a reminder on my calendar to reach out and show up as a real human to that real human. Right. I mean,
yeah,
if we get to a place where those things can do the job, what do they need us for anymore, Chris? Right. What do they like Zillow will take the world over and everybody will go to Zillow to buy and sell houses. But this is a highly nuanced industry where we're dealing with human emotion a lot. Right. And I think that an agent is always going to be in play, and you talking to people is going to be the route to more business.
Yeah, I think we've been so preconditioned to now. Like if you get a text, like we just went through elections here in Virginia. If you get a text from that, or like you get the car dealerships, the dentist office, you know it's a bot. And I think now we're just like, we're gonna think, well, no matter what it is, it's a bot. Well, dude, I really appreciate your time on this, man. That was really helpful. Obviously, if you guys want to get more about Brivity or Place, you can definitely hit me or Bob up. This is really insightful. I guess at the end of the day, man, you just told me like we got to do the work, and we all have a bunch of gold in our database already. Yeah. We don't need to go out and buy a bunch of new leads.
Chris. Like this industry is all about being consistent, showing up, and basically saying the right things, having enough people to say it to, and saying it enough times. And we really believe here in our world that we can guarantee success if somebody's willing to put in the work.
100%. Well, dude, I really appreciate you, bro.
You got it, brother.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for inviting me.